Hello everyone, Ember Power here, and welcome back to a new deck profile. In this one I'm going to be going over Dondozo Tatsugiri from Scarlet and Violet. So Dondozo, pretty bulky kind of Pokemon, 160 HP is actually pretty decent for a single prize basic. Means you are going to survive some hits, although the majority of the X Pokemon will of course, unfortunately, still be able to one-shot you. But stuff like Cramorant will have to two-shot you, so there's at least some advantages to that. And it has the main attack, Release Rage, that for 2 colorless energy, so we can use double turbo, although that will of course reduce our damage output by 20, does 50 damage for each Tatsugiri in your discard pile. And to be honest, my thoughts of this deck initially were it's going to be okay, maybe. It's like going to be a tier 3, kind of tier 4 kind of fringe deck. And having played it a decent amount, I would say this deck is both better and worse than I initially thought it would be. So let's kind of get the negatives out of the way. I feel like the negatives are pretty self-explanatory with Dondozo. You, of course, need to get the 4 Tatsugiri in the disco pile. If you don't do this quickly, then you will just lose. So, yeah, bit of a problem. There also the small matter of the fact that 200 damage or 180 with the double turbo means that you aren't like ever one-hit killing V-Stars or most EX. Now, some EX you can get there with Defiance Band, stuff like Miraidon and Koraidon even, potentially. You can get there with Defiance Band, but unfortunately, the majority of times, you'll just not be one-hit killing anything too relevant. So if it's a lot more awkward for you to get an attacker, which it is in this deck, it is pretty awkward to attack with Dondozo every single turn, then you might run into a spot of bother pretty quickly, because all these efficient 2-prize decks just means that they take a prize, you swing it to them, they take their second prize, you take another prize, and then of course, if you ever whiff an attack, then that's just really bad. So those are kind of like the negatives of Dondozo. Also, the double turbo just reducing your damage output by 20 is obviously really, really bad. So yeah, a couple of bad issues there. Also, the retreat cost of 4 is surprisingly annoying in some situations, because if you don't have any energy in deck, or you don't have a way to shift the Dondozo, what the opponent can do is potentially just like gust it up and stall it for a turn or something. So yeah, there's some annoying stuff your opponent can do to exploit the retreat cost. But all of that aside, moving away from negatives, positives, there's some stuff to like about this. Of course, it is a single prizer, so against stuff like VMAX, your prize trading really nicely. It also means that you get to hit weakness on fire decks, and there is a decent amount of Arcanine out there on the ladder right now. That could change as more Scarlet Violet decks are formed, or the format, forms its own meta, I guess. But being able to hit weakness on fire decks, always appreciate that. And, people do experiment with Arcanine and Armorage pretty frequently. And we do also have a pretty decent draw engine in the form of Ralts Kirlia. So Kirlia has the ability Refinement. It says once in your turn, you may discard a card from your hand and draw 2 cards. So this, of course, allows you to discard Tatsugiri, but it's mainly here for just the draw 2 power. We also play 1 copy of Mew with the ability Mysterious Tail, which will allow us to, once in your turn, look at the top 6 cards of our deck and take an item card. Just a really nice ability to have. It's just a nice one-off as well, because if we go over to the trainers, you'll see that we do play 4 copies of Level Ball. So it's just easy to find Mews, as well as the Kirlia engine, as well as the Tatsugiris. So playing 4 Level Ball, 4 Ultra Ball, it kind of just makes sense that we just throw in a Mew copy in there. So yeah, Mew's pretty useful. We also play 1 copy of Manaphy with the ability Wave Veil, prevent all damage done to your bench Pokemon, so this will protect you against stuff like Urshifu, so they can't ever have multiple prize turns against you, which is really important. We do play 1 Lumineon V, which sounds a bit counterproductive, but honestly it's just really good to help us find supporters. You could play like Professor's Brunette in this deck. I personally don't, because I don't like the supporter that much, but you could play that if you really wanted to, especially if you're already playing Lumineon. We also play 1 copy of Drapion just to have a slightly better chance against Mew, because they're obviously very efficient. Yeah, we can like 2-hit KO those 3-prize Pokemon, but they can also bounce around us with, I forget the name of that attack, the miracle one that just allows them to do like 70 damage and they can send themselves back into the deck, and that's really annoying. So having Drapion as that option is kind of important. But we do have a really nice tech card in the form of Radiant Charizard, which has the ability Excited Heat that says its attacks cost 1 colorless less for each prize card your opponent has taken. So basically it's just a really nice attacker in the late game for allow us to do Combustion Blast for a whole ton of damage. And we do actually play Basic R Energy, so we can use Combustion Blast and effectively do 250 or 280 with a Defiance Band. So this allows us to, potentially KO the last V-Star or last EX for the final 2 prize cards in the game. Pretty decent overall. So just going over energy counts pretty briefly, we do have the 4 copies of Double Turbo, but of course this will reduce your attack cost by 2. And then of course we do have 4 copies of Basic R Energy. I am playing Basic R Energy to capitalize on Radiant Charizard. If you would rather play Radiant Greninja, you could lean into Water Energy, and at that point it might be a bit better, because then you could use, stuff like Irida more easily, stuff like, not Capacious Bucket, because that's not in the format, but Water, it kind of makes more sense, because if you were to use Water Energy, you could also use Tatsugiri's Miles in Place to accelerate energy from the deck to essentially build up a Dondozo if you do have to lead with the Tatsugiri, so that is kind of an option worth bearing in mind. But for the trainers, it's pretty self-explanatory. We've got 2 copies of Raihan for research, because we need to bin those Tatsugiris. 2 copies of Defiance Band to allow us to attack for more. 2 copies of Collapsed Stadium is pretty inspired, because it means that we can essentially bench an extra Tatsugiri and then discard it. So we can like fill up the bench with stuff and then play a Collapsed Stadium, discard the extra Pokemon that we don't want. It also means we can discard Lumineon if we really don't want to. I'll say that we will want to discard Lumineon eventually, so we have to find Collapsed Stadium to discard Lumineon, or Drapion if we end up opening with it, or, Tatsugiri. So Collapsed Stadium, pretty good in that sense. Also decent disruption. We also play 4 copies of Trekking Shoes. We can also find this with Mew, so it's pretty decent in that form, but it will obviously allow us to discard Tatsugiris if we get lucky. 4 copies of Level Ball just to find most of the Pokemon, although you can't find Dondozo with this. We do have 3 copies of Serena, which is decent gust, but it's also just extra discard synergy for the Tatsugiri. 4 Ultra Ball, which again, more discard synergy, but also being able to find out Dondozos is pretty good. We also play 4 copies of Nest Ball, so we are going all out in on the Pokemon search, but we kind of need to in this deck. 1 Hisuian Heavy Ball, because obviously if we prize a Tatsugiri, that's really, really bad. 2 copies of Switch, just to move out the active if we ever need to. And then 1 Boss's Orders for the additional gusting. So that's kind of like the list for Dondozo Tatsugiri. Honestly, I don't think this deck is that bad, but it definitely does have a couple of issues. Some of those issues being its damage output, which basically means, I think the Articuno build might be a bit better. And I've seen some people, cover that list and say it's really good. So I'll probably have to give that a go at some point, but I can't bring myself to spend precious credits on Articunos, because Articunos are really only good in this deck and not anything else. So yeah, it's going to be a bit of a tricky one to decide, but we'll have to try out some different Dondozos. But anyway, let me know what you think of this deck down below if you want to see gameplay for it or anything, or a different kind of variant. But yeah, it's been Air Power, and thank you for watching.